Hey everyone, what's going on? It is Brian. We are back, and I have another top 5 video for you all. So a couple of weeks ago, I did a video that was the top 5 relatively accessible bourbons in 2021. And a couple of comments I got on there were asking if I was going to do some rye. So I started to think about the ryes that I've had this year, and I wanted to put a list together for you. Now, I wanted to go ahead and be said, the bourbons I talked about in that previous video are not necessarily readily available in every market, easy to find right off the shelf, and or price conscious bottles. And the ryes that we talk about today, while a little bit better than the bourbons, aren't exactly either. I have hopes of in the future to do videos of some of these budget bottles that are relatively available. So the content that's going to go in those videos is going to be slightly different than the content that's going in these videos. And that's probably a little bit of that distinction there. In that bourbon video, I mainly wanted to focus on bourbons that were released in the year 2021. And I wanted to do the same here with the ryes, but as I was going through the ryes that I liked, I found out that maybe 1 or 2 of these aren't necessarily 2021 releases, but they were new to me this year, and so they're making it on the list. Before we go too far, go ahead and jump down below, hit subscribe, give me a thumbs up, let me know if you all are enjoying the content. We're gonna dive right on in with the first bottle, and that is the Stella Rye. This rye is kind of like a gobstopper. Every time I seemed to visit this bottle, it seemed to change a little bit of the flavor. And when I first tried both the Stella Rye and the Stella Bourbon, I didn't think that I was all that big a fan of the rye, but the more I drank it, the more I appreciated the flavor, I appreciated the nuance, and I appreciated the complexity that seemed to change every time that I had a pour of the bottle. If you want to hear me talk more about that, I do have a video that I'll link down below that you can go back and check out that gives a little bit more detail about the Stella Rye in general. The second one that we're going to talk about is another single barrel that was released here in Louisville, but hopefully your all's miles may vary with one nearby to you all. There's a store in town that did an F Cancer bottle of the Wilderness Trail Rye. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with the Wilderness Trail Ryes, but the Wilderness Trail bourbons and ryes that I have had, I've been very impressed with at the age of which they are when they're releasing. These things are 4-year products, and I think that as they get a little bit more age to them, you can already tell that there's a lot of promise of flavor that they're producing that's only going to get better as it goes. The Wilderness Trail had some oak to it. It had some candied citrus notes. It had this sweet mint sort of flavor to it, a pleasant body, and it was one of the nicer 4-year ryes or 4-year products in general that I've had in quite some time. And I really look forward to seeing what continues to come out of this distillery. The third bottle we're going to talk about is a pick that is local to Liquor Barn here in Louisville, Kentucky. And this also comes from Starlight, who we talked about on the bourbon episode. This is a single barrel rye that is finished in honey barrels. Now, the thing that I love specifically about this bottle, I have both the honey finished bourbon and the honey finished rye. And while I really like the bourbon, there's something that is so incredibly drinkable about the rye. Now, it has to be said, if you're not exactly a finished whiskey person, you might not necessarily be a big fan of this. But what I love about Starlight Rye in general is that it has this sort of chocolate note meets kind of a malty note and a little bit of citrus there as well. And this is kind of a through line with some of the rye profiles, but they do such interesting, unique finishes all the time. So from Tokai barrels to Ambruana that we talked about in the bourbon episode, to double oaks, to wine finishes, they do so many unique things. Another one that a local group of mine picked, it's an indigenous rye, and these indigenous ryes, they don't have a lot of these bottles, but they come off with all these really funky coffee or chocolate in there that just make a really quirky rye, which are unique offerings to have. But what I love about this honey barrel is it does bring forward a little bit more of the citrus candy, a little bit more of the floral, and then this really nice sweet honey profile. So if you like sweet things, if you like desserty type pours, if you like things that are honeyed, you're going to love finding a honey barrel finished Starlight. Now, there was a comment in the last video too about some of these products and their availability. The reason I bring Starlight on here is because I know there are a lot of groups all around that are doing picks at Starlight, and I know that Starlight's kind of doing some 3rd and half barrel releases so that they have more allocations to go around. And so my hope is that there is a group or a store in your all's general area where you might be able to find some of the finishes that I talk about in these videos. The next one I'm going to talk about, I wasn't actually sure if I was going to put in the video until I reread the press release and saw that their plans are to continue to expand the markets from beyond Kentucky. And that is the New Riff 100% malted rye. When I first tried this product, I was surprised with how bourbon-like it was, and all these big vanilla notes, and it just had a lower amount of spice than what you would traditionally know in a rye whiskey. Some baking spices, some cinnamon and sugar notes, light touches of oak to finish, and then it also had some of this orange candy. So now that I'm talking about these pours, I see there might be a through line with like an orange citrus note to some of these ryes. Not meant to be intentional. But there's something about this malted rye that has just been one of my favorite new riff releases that I've seen in the last couple of years, but also just makes a really great rye. And it's something that I hope, as time goes on, it will be available in more markets. The last bottle happens to be a new release to me, although this was released in 2019, and this happens to be the Knob Creek Cask Strength Straight Rye Whiskey. This is a little over 9 years old, and I first tried this just a week or so back in a blind that was sent to me, and there was this profile that had a lot of similarities to the Knob Creek bourbons that I remember, but I still thought that maybe it was a rye. I wasn't familiar with this product, and then my friend let me borrow this one in order to try as well. And so what I love about this so much is that while we are in a time where we are fading out of the availability of the older age Knob Creek bourbons, here you have a cask strength rye that's over 9 years old, and I feel like I see in a lot of places that ryes don't need as much time to absorb some of the oak and flavor and age that you get out of the barrel. That really, in substitution of having the available older bourbons, you have something that has a lot of maple and caramel on the nose, is saturated on the palate, that might come off a little bit peppery and leathery and dry, but at the same time has some oak and some depth. That full flavor, deep cask strength rye whiskey is something that I don't feel like I get a chance to taste all that often. There aren't a whole lot of older cask strength whiskeys that I'm familiar with on the market, besides maybe some MGP 95.5 recipes. So this is a welcomed addition, especially for someone who likes kind of that drier, slightly nuttier, more interesting profile. For people who never got a chance to try the Booker's Rye, this comes from Beam, and it is at least a product that will give you a taste until we wait for another Booker's Rye to come out. Now, while that concludes my list of things that I think are more easily accessible in most markets, there is one product that is an honorable mention that I want to talk about, because I do believe it's probably one of the best rye whiskeys that is available on the market. And that happens to be the Jack Daniel's single barrel strength rye. I could sit down with this and it constantly evolves. It is the type of pour that seems to go up against more limited edition, higher allocation, higher sought after bottles in the wider whiskey market. And while it is difficult to find, I think this is a product that was readily accessible as soon as it came out, until people started to find it and see how good it was, and now it has become harder to find. But if this is something that's available near you, if you find it on a shelf or a store brings it in, please don't hesitate to grab this bottle. I think you're gonna really enjoy the flavors that come from it. And I think a lot of people were initially surprised because it's coming out of Jack Daniel's. But as we talked about previously, in the Jack Daniel's versus Old Forester barrel strength head-to-head for the bourbons, I think we can see that Jack Daniel's does put out some incredible whiskey. Guys, I hope that was informational for you all. Again, this is just my palate, this is just my take, and there are other ryes on the market that are a little bit more accessible and readily available, and I want to save that for another video, so I want that to be said. If there's other rye whiskeys that you all have really been enjoying, please leave me comments down below. I'd love to interact with you all and hear what things you all have been enjoying this year. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it as always. If you want to get more content, please subscribe to the Inch Proof podcast. That's a podcast that I do with Drew P. Whiskey, and he's also here on YouTube. Thursday nights, we're generally live over on his channel doing blind tastings or just general bourbon chatter or talking about our recent barrel picks. If you want to support what Drew's doing, what I'm doing, and the content that we're producing here on YouTube, feel free to subscribe to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/entryproofpodcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Until next time, we'll see you later.